My name is Jane Weru, and I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. I got involved in Kituo when I was a young advocate. At the time, I was working with Mutaza Jaffa, an advocate who was in private practice. And I saw him work very closely with the poor people of the city of Nairobi, especially through a priest called Father Alex. So Jaffa used to volunteer for the Catholic Church in Korogocho. So I started going to Kituo while I was still working with Jaffa and got exposed to the challenges that the people of Korogocho faced. And that is how I began working with Kituo, because at that point Mutaza was kind of leading the Kituo, was playing a very key role in the formation of the Kituo. During my years as executive director of Kituo, the urban poor within the city of Nairobi had very many challenges. This was during the Moi era, and I think most of us know that there was a lot of oppression, especially of the poor, during that time. And during those years, many communities, poor communities within the city of Nairobi, were faced with the threat of eviction because the lands on which they lived had been allocated, and the people who had gotten these grants would go to the police and get the police or orders from courts, and they would come and evict whole communities from the lands they lived. So in these early years, the Kituo took up a leadership role in campaigning for the poor to remain in the lands that they lived in. So we went to court in so many cases. Some of them were really landmark cases or received international recognition, like the case of Soweto Spring Valley, where the president, where the BBC actually approached the president and asked him for comment on why that eviction was taking place. So we had many of these cases. And luckily, over the years, though none of these cases were won, they managed to stop the people being moved from these lands. During that time, the judiciary was very compromised. It was not independent at all. And like anybody who worked in the human rights field will tell you that you would never win a case against anybody who had a position in government. It was very difficult. But we continued as Kituo to take these cases to court because they provided us with a strategy of providing that initial relief that would give people, the communities, an opportunity to come together and mobilize. And we realized that it was so important, it was critical that communities organize and have a voice and resist evictions. And that is how the formation of Muungano wa Wanavijiji started. It started around poor people coming together to build solidarity against forced evictions within the city. And that movement today has grown, and it covers, it is a very vibrant movement today with thousands and thousands of groups that do 101 things, from savings to land rights to working on climate change issues. And that is something I think Kituo needs to be proud of, because it was one of the initial founders of this movement. So then it was, however, not only in Nairobi where the poor were facing the loss of the lands on which they had lived on for many years. At the coasts, the Kituo worked with communities like the Majaoni community that again was faced with the threat of eviction from the lands on which they lived. And we conducted a lot of research, and we were able over time to establish who had been granted these lands. And the people who had been granted the lands in the area of Majaoni were amongst the most powerful people in the country. Just anybody who was who's who in Kenyan politics had a portion of land. And when we got this information, I believe the people within government got to know that we had this information. So I think because of this, Kituo was put in a very difficult position. It was put in a position where it was seen as a threat by some, and therefore we began to get people coming into our offices and throwing a bomb into the office, and eventually our offices just lit up and were burnt to the ground. And for 2 years, we had no offices. We tried to look for space that we could rent out so that we could continue working, but nobody wanted to rent out office space to us. So for 2 years, Kituo was nomadic. And at that point, we were very lucky because the National Council for NGOs, that was at the time, again headed by Mutaza, provided us the space to continue working so that this institution did not die. Because of the problems that Kituo faced, the initial problems Kituo faced with the bombings, the donors came together and decided, and especially Hivos, decided to support Kituo by buying a house that Kituo could call home. And at that time then we were able then to purchase the building in which Kituo is currently situated in.